Okay, so the case that we were discussing was the case in our Mishnah. The case in our Mishnah was when there were two women that were married to two brothers, which means each of them was a potential Yavam for the other. Just reviewing what we learned yesterday. Each one was a potential Yavam for the other. And they both came back from Medina Sayyam. They both said, thank you so much, Mati. They both said, our husband died. They each have an amonis for themselves, but they don't have an amonis for each other. So unless there's an independent raya for each of these two women that their brother-in-law died, they're still going to have a problem that they're connected to their brother. But if there were two other brothers, and the problem is if they're connected to the other missing brother, they can't get even more chalitza from him because he's nowhere to be found. As a matter of fact, he died. But what happens if there's two other brothers, and each of these two women did yibum with another brother there who was there, and then those two additional brothers died without children? At that point, Rabbi Elazar lets them get married again. The question was why. The question was why. So the Gemara said, and this is 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Kuf Yutesma Beis, Boy Rava, my time is Rabbi Elazar. Why is it that Rabbi Elazar allows these women to remarry? Mishum de Kasovar, Sarah Meida Lachavida. Is it because he disputes the Tanakama and holds that one Sarah is Nemenes to say ages for her Chavita? And Tosfos taught us yesterday that although when a woman is coming with the explicit kavana of being matir, her sister-in-law, her tzara, there she's not believed. We're afraid that she's trying to mess her up. Here the woman is coming to be made for herself. She's saying testimony that her husband died. And we accept that testimony. Now the question is, once we've accepted that testimony, can we also apply our knowledge that we glean from that testimony to impact her co-wife? The whole proof is that she wouldn't mess herself up. And the only reason why we let her sister-in-law marry is because we know that it must be that her husband's brother died, because otherwise her Yevamos, this woman, wouldn't mess herself up and knowingly marry, even though she knows her husband's alive, just to mess up her friend. That wouldn't happen. So what's the difference between these two reasons for Rabbi Elazar? The answer is quite simple. Do you let her marry before her co-wife marries? If you hold one Sarah could say ages for her chavrita, even if she didn't get married, but it's only after we see that she's demonstrated that she's acting on her testimony, then you don't let the Sarah get married. So let's go back to the Mishnah a second, because I was a little bit misupik. In the Mishnah, when Rabbi Elazar argues and says, is that only in a case where they first married to two other brothers and then the two other brothers died? If you hold that Rabbi Elazar holds that the testimony of one co-wife is effective for the other co-wife, well then right away he's arguing on the ratio of the Mishnah. When each woman comes along and says Meis Bailey, then each one now is Nemon automatically to be matir the other one. So he would argue with the Tanakama, and he would say Shtei Yevamos Meis Bailey, they're both mutter. She's mutter because her husband died, and she doesn't have to marry the Yavam because her co-wife, or it's not her co-wife, her sister-in-law is Nemenes to say that her husband died. But if you learn that the only reason why we let her get remarried is because her sister-in-law wouldn't be makalkal herself, well then until it was nesyabu, until they each did even with two other brothers, and each of these two women demonstrated b'poil that they got married because of it. So there's no chash anymore that she wants to mess her up. because she wouldn't destroy herself and mess up her sister-in-law, only there would it be a riot. So the nafkamina that the Gemara is saying really is, does Rabbi Elazar only argue on the second case, or does Rabbi Elazar argue on the first case as well? So Nachama. If you hold that Tzara is always Namenes to say Edus on behalf of her sister-in-law, well then, even if she didn't marry yet, you'll still be matter the Tzara because the Tzara has a Namenes. But she's not about her Edus, it's about the fact that she took action and she married, so that shows that she's quite sure that her husband died. Therefore, only if she actually got remarried, only then will you allow the tzara to remarry, but otherwise not. And that pashtus only occurs in the second case where there were two other brothers and each one demonstrated that they're sure their husband died because they did yibum with their brother. So what is the reason behind the psak of Rabbi Elazar? Toshma, Rabbi Elazar said, "Hoyel v'hutru liyavamin, hutru l'chol." That's what Rabbi Elazar said. Hoyel v'hutru, not since they married the Yevamim, since they were mutter to the Yevamim, they're mutter l'chol. Iyamut b'shleima dehilay makalkal nafsha. If you say the svara is because she's not makalkal herself, Hainu, it makes sense. If it's a din that she's not makalkal herself, it makes sense. Why? Once she married the brother, another brother, now they're mutter. If you hold that one tzar can say edus for the other one because there's an amanus, well then afal gab la intav nami, which really is a kashu. Rabbi Elazar didn't only have to argue in the seifa. Rabbi Elazar could have even argued in the ratio. El shmamina, time with Rabbi Elazar mishum de inzavu v'loy mekalkal nafshe. You're right. The Gemara is going to feel similar to what you're saying. Dr. Gemara, Rabbi Elazar was the vrayim ka'amadu. Maybe Rabbi Elazar is just trying to say, even according to your perspective, lididi, according to me, Sarah me'ida l'chavrita. A tzara will have the manas to be made l'chavrita. V'yavel gab lo inta minas vinala. And she has an amana, so even though neither of them got married, they already are lemon for their sisters-in-laws, and therefore they could get married. Eludischu also another man. Oidi li mias, at least agree to me in the second case. They had the instant when they already got married. Minas vinala. Why mishum di mekalkal namsho? Because she's not going to mess herself up. Rabbanon Thomas Navshi and Pelishtim Mudakavla. So I apologize to you, Mati. That was the Gemara's territory to the next kasha. And so Mati's asking.
Doesn't mean that he's not married.
Correct. So that's how the Gemara must assume the Taich in the Mishnah is. Hutru Yevamim means since they actually got married already. And Rabbi Elazar's taina in this nusach of the Mishnah is really I hold she's nemanis all the time, even before she remarried. But you Rabbanon who don't give her nemanis, at least when she actually was able to demonstrate that she surely believes her husband died because she took yibum from her brother-in-law, there at least be moided to me that she has an nemanis. And the Rabbanon said no. Thomas Nafshi and Pelishtim Mudakavda. We see before in the Gemara that someone can hate someone so much they'll destroy their own lives just to take down the other. Tashma. A woman who went with her husband to Medina Sayyam. She didn't have children, so there was a chazaka at the time that she left that should Rahman her husband die, she would be mechuyev in yibum. Uvav Amra, and she came along and she said, "Meis Baili, my husband died." So the law is Tinasei, she can get married. V'sitel ksuba, so she gets her ksuba. But v'tzara asura, but her tzara cannot get remarried. Rabbi Elazar says, "Hoyel v'hutra he, since she's mutter, hutra nami tzaras." So you have a riot that is totally in the heter only. This is what I was referring to. You have a riot that's totally in the heter only, not in her actually getting remarried. So you see, she has an amonis. So that's going to Ema Elazar said, "Hoyel v'hutra," what he meant is Hoyel v'hutra v'nisis. Since we're mad to her, and she acted on it, that's why she's believed. Frankly, more why is if that's shot in the Mishnah? If shot in the Mishnah is that she's only believed because she acted on it, and therefore it's Torah's mutter, because she wouldn't do a Thomas Nav, she would not answer herself to her husband. So once we see that she actually acted on her testimony, that gives credence and credibility to her that her husband really died. But what's the raya? The leichish dilma begita asay. Maybe this woman is a real lowlife. Before she came back from Medina, she said, her husband's alive, never died. She got a get from him. And now she's coming back and saying, my husband died. Right? So even if she gets married, it doesn't prove anything because she has to get all along. She's such an interval that she went and got a get, and she's already out of the marriage. She's nothing to do with them anymore. And now she still wants to stab him in the back, right? Zok Gemara, you have a very good concern. He did interval Yisrael Hachanami. If she got married to a Yisrael, you're 100% right. You cannot trust her because maybe she's lying, maybe she has a get. But if she went and got married to a Kohen, then she's not going to mess herself up. She's not going to pull out a get and say, ha, he's really alive, I got a get. Because they're going to make her divorce her second husband, because now she's a crucial Kohen. Once again, that's a Nukimta to Chiddush.
The second marriage was Kohen.
Correct. So if she comes back with the second marriage, then we don't be Choshen anymore, Dilma, that she has a get, and therefore she's only getting remarried because of the get. I just want to say that today's broadcast is being sponsored by Rav David Dayan, who Mishpachtoi, the Ilon Nishmas, his grandmother, Raina Bas Avram Allah Shalom, whose yahrzeit is today, Vav Tammuz, in the Shomish Rav and Aliyah. Today is also the yahrzeit of a very famous person. His name is Yonatan Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu's brother's yahrzeit today. Why is that significant? You know when he died? He died in the Tebi. Right, so today it was July 4th that year, but this year it's not July 4th, it's July 5th. But it was Vav Tammuz where the boy made Nisim and the flies and rescued Klal Yisrael, who were hostages in the Tebi. The Hutner was not. Hutner was in the hostages where the planes landed in the Jordanian desert. That was a different hostage state. What happened? So that's unbelievable. And what you see from the Israeli story in Entebbe is when you do a favor for somebody, you don't realize you're doing a favor for yourself. The only way they were able to plan this whole rescue in Entebbe is because the Israelis designed and built the airport in Uganda, in Entebbe. They built it. So they actually had the drawings, the blueprints to the airport. So that in their practice, they knew exactly how the airport was laid out. That's right. That's right. But the Eibishter Titus Torah Chesed. The Eibishter makes it that your Chesed ends up saving yourself. Like we had the Masa a couple of weeks ago with the Yid who donated money for Kfudim and they ended up paying for Don Kaiver. When someone's saying testimony, that he saw that somebody died, how much is required to positively identify a person? What's required? So Rashi says, in Me'idim ala ish shemeis, elam kein ra'u meis, beparts of panav, you had to see his face, im chaytmai, with the person's nose. Only then she yachoyin lakiroi shezahu. Avoloi ra'u beparts of, if you didn't see his face, or shenital chaytmai, or chman l'tzlan, his nose is missing, then ein ra'idin alav lahasi yisishtan. You cannot say eidos that you can positively identify somebody. Shema einhu. Maybe this is not the right person. So, so Toisvis, okay, we'll see Toisvis in a second. There's a whole bunch of questions here on how the coroner identifies bodies. Zogt the Gemara, Zogt the Mishnah. Even though there are simonim on the body that would indicate this is the person, you cannot rely on those simonim. Ein meidim alav. I'm sorry. That's already more detailed. Yeah. And we're going to soon see that the Gemara asks a raya. The Gemara is not a kasha. I simonim or the raya, you can give back. I'm going to see you with simonim. So the Gemara ends up saying that the simonim begufa and kelav are simonim that aren't 100% proof, like the color of his clothing, right? That wouldn't prove anything. Of course, even if they see him dying, they cannot say they saw him dead until they actually see him dead. Even if they saw him maguyat, the Rashi is gudu ilana, cut, munutach. They see him cut up umali psoyim v'chaburay scherem. Let's say he's stabbed multiple times. That's not enough for them to say he died. Maybe he survived. Or if it's tzolav, alasliva, that's like crucified. Or even if you see that there's an animal actually eating from his body, that you cannot say edus. It's possible that he still survived. Next, you could only say edus up to 3 days after a person dies. And Rashi says why? Because in ra'u b'soich gimel yomim misasai, then me'idin alav. Avalim loy ra'u ad la'achar gimel yomim chashin shemen eshtanu maris panam. After 3 days, a person's face could change. The ein zeh shem savurim. And you think it's Moshe, and it could really be somebody else. Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba Aimer, loy kol adam, v'loy kol ha'mokim, v'loy kol ha'shari shaman. It all depends on the circumstances. Like Rashi says, yesh lech adam shememar lina peach mishar adam. There are certain bodies that'll blow up faster. Koloin adam shaman, a fat person. Yesh, could you imagine a fat person gains weight even after he dies? V'yesh lech adam, v'yesh lech mokim, shechaman agas b'yoytzer. There could be hotter places that will impact the decomposition of the body faster. And there are seasons where the world is warmer and colder. In the winter, naturally, a mace wouldn't deteriorate as fast as a mace would in the summer. A mace the Gemara wants to know that Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba coming to argue that you shouldn't be believed, even in the cases where the Mishnah says you are believed. Or is Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba trying to tell you that even in the cases where the Mishnah says you're not believed, maybe you should be believed? It's a little bit of an interesting taisus that's like somewhat halach l'maisa about how to identify a dead body. So let's run through this taisus. And of course, there's a lot of halachas nowadays. What's called positive identification? Pirish, mishum de misham ve'elach. After the third day, mishtana, like Rashi says, the body changes. When do we say that after 3 days we can't identify a body? That's only if only the head's there. But what if the body is complete? Even though the forehead and the nose is missing, there you could identify. So our Mishnah is speaking about if you only found his head. But if you found his whole body complete, just part of his face was missing, that's still good enough to identify. We should never have to see such a sight. Maybe this is another major clue that Tosis is offering. Maybe this is someone who doesn't recognize the person. He comes and says, I saw a person that has this type of forehead and this type of nose, but he doesn't really recognize the person. There, Simonim are only believed if the face is complete. But what if somebody knows the person and therefore recognizes the person? There already, you can rely on somebody saying testimony to Simon Haguf if it's somebody who recognizes the person. Kivan sheish kol gufa and vafilu la'acher kamayom. What if there's no damage to the body in his face? Vaday near davar poshit to yuchlu lehakirai afilu acher kamayom. The also, if the face was complete and there's no damage to the face, it's a davar poshut zoktoisvis that the person is recognized even after many days. Ki einem ishtana kolkach. A body doesn't change that much. The davar yaduhu, and everybody knows, so nikar afilu acher kamayom. Afilahu emes. Afilahu emes. Teicha shenechtov apartov. Ein me'idin alav ela b'soich chimo yamim. Even though we know that halacha is that if the face is damaged, you cannot be made upon him unless you were there within 3 days. He even shalom, but since the guf shalom, the gam yochel liyah shu b'soich chimo yamim. Also, how do you know for 3 days? If you weren't there when the guy died, how could you possibly know how many days passed since the guy died? Because then ein letloisoi ela v'toich gimel yamim davka shubas or tam shubas b'sevayasher. In the days of Tosfos, there were pogroms, there were mass murders, there were attacks. So this was probably some commonplace. Tosfos, everybody knows you can recognize a body after 3 days. I don't know. I didn't even touch that body. So Tosfos is reflecting what probably went on in his times, where people were bludgeoned to death all the time and needed ways to be able to identify them Allah. Now, Kopan, we see there's a lot of factors involved. There's Piyos there's depending on the whole body there. Sorry? Who? Lavru? Sorry?
So once they came and they were marching out to go to work, he was screaming, and er sucht eines auf den Mensch, and that's
So other people should hear.
Other people should hear that if she's going to, you know, the people.
The Rambam says Yevamos looked for his father.
Right.
Very.
Right. He used to bury the dead bodies. Zok Gemara. Tanraban Padachas. Padachas is the forehead, the low parts of panim, below padachas. If only the forehead was there, or only the rest of the face was there, the whole face has to be there, including the nose, for someone to be able to identify the person. And according to Tosfos, for someone who doesn't recognize the person, to identify with someone. Omar Abai v'Temer of Kana. Micro, where do you see this in the pasuk? Zokt the heilige pasuk in Yeshaya. Hakaris Paneim Ansabam. What the pasuk is talking about, the pashtus, is why is it that your fourth son looks like the milkman? In other words, people who are naive get caught. The Rebbeinu Shalom makes it that they should look like the father, and therefore he won't be able to be hidden that something improper occurred. But what Rashi says, what we learn from this pasuk, is as follows. There's actually machlokes Rashi and Tosfos what we learned from this pasuk. So Rashi says, "Hakaris Paneim Ansabam, Heidabam." Said to them, "Alma ein edus b'shar guf elo b'hekerpan." You see that? How do you identify a person? You identify a person by his face. That's how Rashi learns. Tosfos learns, and from this pasuk you see that you need to see the whole face, which means the padachas and the parcha, not just part of it. That's the raya that we're bringing from this pasuk according to Tosfos. So the question is it a raya to the Mishnah that just says you have to see the face? Was it a raya to the brisa we just brought that it's necessary to see both the padachas and the parts of imachoitim in order to identify something? Probably because without that, how would you know that this is the child of the other father? That's what I'm guessing. Because otherwise, how would you know? But you know what? Let's look at. Let's quickly look at Tosfos for a second. Perish shetzarich padachas al pneim. L'hachim ma'isi hakra dichsiv hakarish pneim onsabam. The mashma shetzarich hakara levad min apam. Hakarish pneim is mashma. There's a hakara without just the face only, meaning you need both. But I'm not actually sure how Tosfos sees it from the pasuk. So I definitely hear your kasha. But the words of Tosfos are, once again, the chsiv hakara pneim onsabam. The mashma shetzarich hakara levad min apam. So hakara pneim is a hakara in addition to the pneim. Otherwise, it could have said pneim onsabam. The fact is hakara pneim. Maybe that means that there's something else. There's other factors involved. Okay, so let's talk more about it. Abba bar Marta, the Hava Abba bar Menyumi. So I don't know why they refer to him by his mother's name. Have a maski bay, the Reish Galusha Zuzi. He owed money to the Reish Galusa. So the Reish Galusa were sending people to find him to do collections. I see Kira. So what did he do? He took some wax, which is like a silly putty compound, or like silicone, like a glue. Dovuk bibel Yosy. He put it on his forehead. I'm sorry, he put it on a shmata. He put it on a shmata, and Dovuk bapuse, and now he's stuck with that glue. He stuck to his face this shmata to cover his forehead. He actually just covered his forehead like a bandana. And then chalav kamayu v'loy b'shkaruha, and he was able to walk right by them, and they didn't recognize him because it's only his forehead. His forehead was covered, and they weren't able to recognize him. Yeah, meitzach, Rashi says. So they covered his forehead like a bandana, and even that alone was enough that they couldn't recognize him. So yeah, you have a raya from here that you need to see the full forehead with the face in order to recognize him.
Now they just they go to get to the original line, right?
No, that's moving on.
Right, but they-
Oh, they're looking behind.
Zok the Gemara. Aval pi sheyesh simonim. You still can't rely on the simonim alone unless there's parts of ponim imachayt. Zok the Gemara. Remember, simonim lav deraisa. Are you suggesting that bringing simonim isn't a deraisa dika proof? Or a minute. What happens if there was a get that was lost? There was a get that was lost. Rashi says the case was hamaybi get leisha va'avari menu. Someone was bringing a get to a woman, he was a shliach leilach, I guess, and he lost the get, and now he's got to find it. So matzah kosher b'kis. He found the get tied up in his money wallet, u'ba'arniki, or kiss arniki, are different types of bags or money wallets that he holds, or uvitabas. It was connected to a signet ring, which is once again something that would be identified to a person. Or it was found ben kelev. And Rashi says the definition of ben kelev means ben klebesai, amongst the vessels in his house, not his clothing. Umakar es a kiss. He's makar the kiss that the get is tied to. Vesetabas, or the signet ring that it's tied to. Shein shaloi, that these are his. So then kosher, the get will be kosher. We're not choshed that maybe these accessories belong to somebody else, and then by definition the get is somebody else's. I get acharu. Alma, from the fact that you rely on these items as simonim that actually will identify whose get it is. Alma samchina simonim the isle bekitzu v'arniki. You see that he can rely on these simonim that help him identify that these items are his. Even to allow a woman to remarry because of it. Alma simonim deraisa. That must be a proof that simonim is deraisa, because these simonim are actually allowing her to remarry. Afilu lizman meruba. Even if a long time has passed, kosher it will be kosher. So if you have a right, simonim is deraisa. So why in our Mishnah are the simonim not helpful? There's actually a machlokes tanoim if simonim is deraisa. The Tanya we learned, ein ma'idin ala shuma. You can't use a shuma as a simon. A shuma is a pimple. If anyone is art school, how do you touch it in English? A mole? Okay. A mole for those brown things? Okay. Ein ma'idin ala shuma. Let's suggest that this is the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Mahavoy and the Tanakama as to whether or not a mole is a good raya. The Ma'ashav is Shemanim Deraisa, Ma'ashav is Shemanim Derabanan, and therefore that could be our machlokes here as well. Amar Rabba Zakrava, no, the Chula Alma Shemanim Deraisa. Everybody holds that Shemanim is Deraisa. Hacha b'Shuma Matsuya b'Vengila Kemifim. Here the question is a Shuma a good simon? If it was a simon, Shemanim is Deraisa. But is a Shuma a good simon? Raj ben Giloi Shenoil b'Perek Echad u'B'Masalach. I guess if a shuma could be found on some other person, then shuma is still a raya. But if it's possible for the shuma to show up on a person of similar age, similar type, so then a shuma on somebody is not a raya. If the shuma only shows up on someone of a different age, so then shuma could still be a raya, because this guy at this age is found with the shuma. But if someone else his age and his type could also have a shuma, then the shuma is not a raya. You'll never find such a mole on someone his age, and therefore it's a unique identifier. Or maybe there's a different machlokes. This mole is a mole. The question is, do moles change from the way they look after someone dies? So just because you see a mole that resembles the mole that somebody had when they were alive, seeing that mole on the body is not a raya anymore.
Either changes or it doesn't.
Oh, so it can't be a machlokes mitzvahs. Whenever we run into a machlokes mitzvahs, the way we usually for it is, it does change a little bit. The question is, does it change enough that we could no longer rely on it as a positive identification? Sorry? In the Chadami? Really, everybody holds the simanim derabbanan. And Rashi tells us what is the makar if simanim is deraisa. It's from the pasuk that speaks about mitzias, and it says af asimlam b'chlal haisa. When the Torah discusses the different types of things that someone could lose, it lists off a whole bunch of items, and it lists off a simla as well. And we learn from a simla that has simanim, so too you return things with simanim. So really, maybe everybody holds that simanim is rabbanan. V'hacha b'shuma simin muvik commitment. Now the shaila is, if shuma is not just an average proof, but it's a really, really reliable proof. It's like a fingerprint. So if Rashi, even if universally simanim only are good for din derabanan, a siman kihai, but such a siman muvik, like a fingerprint, samchinon afilu b'isur daraisa. So maybe a shuma is a super siman. Ma'asav is siman muvik, u'ma'asav lav siman muvik. According to the lashon that we said, the machlokes is of simanim deraisa. Hakatani, it says in our Mishnah, it's not a good siman. So how would we understand our Mishnah if you hold that everybody holds simanim deraisa? If you hold that everybody holds simanim deraisa, how would you explain our Mishnah? Clearly, our Mishnah doesn't rely on the siman. And for the Gemara, the siman that our Mishnah is talking about is not such a good siman. Gufay is the orach v'guts. The siman in the gufa is it was tall, it was short. That's not a good siman because there's many people who are tall and short. Or Caleb, even if I say he was wearing the same shirt, it had the guy's initials monogrammed. So I know it's this guy. So if tomorrow, no, it's still not a riot, the chashin and l'sheila. Maybe this fellow lent out his shirt. And since he lent out his shirt, the body that you found is not the person whose name is on the shirt, it's the person who borrowed it. Because otherwise it would be fair on the Mishnah why you said it can't be relied upon. So for the Gemara, if you hold that it's possible that if someone borrows something, we have a brisa that says without a doubt that a chamor can be returned to an owner if he only has simonim on the saddle, not on the chamor itself. So and therefore a positive identity on a piece of clothing that you know for sure belongs to somebody who's not a good raya. Well, how could you give back a chamor if someone gave a siman on the ukov? Maybe someone borrowed the saddle for his animal. Yes. Nobody would ever use a borrowed saddle to put on his chamor. You know why? The mask of leilachamor. A saddle sort of mates and grows with the animal together. So if you put a saddle from one animal on another animal, it's going to irritate your animal. So that won't happen. So therefore, by a saddle, you know for sure it could have only been on this particular animal. Matzah kosher, the kids of Arniki, Uvatabas, we just learned about Alpha Brisa, that you maternisha labaila by saying that this is her get. If you found it connected to these items, which once again are simonim, heichim adrina, tabas chayshe l'ziyufe. Maybe the ring, sure, it might be the signet ring that is identical to this person, but who says somebody else didn't hack into his computer and duplicate all of his unique identifiers? I'm sorry. Oh, that's a third. So, how could you give it back? Because if you hold it, well, let me give you hold simanim. If you hold it's not a good siman, if you're going to a siman is not a good siman. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. You're right. If you hold that someone doesn't lend things out, so then, if you hold people do lend things out, you said that by begadim, you chayish l'sheila, So how could you give something back? How could you give back a tabas? Maybe it was lent out. Dr. Mara, tabas chayis was yufa. No one would lend out his signet ring. Because if I lend out my signet ring, that's like giving you the password to all my accounts. Nobody would ever do that. So therefore, if you find something near a signet ring, you could be 100% sure that it belonged to that person, and it's not, and he didn't lend it out. I'm sorry? That's right. Yehuda did lend it out. He was in a tight spot. Kiss for Arniki. And the kiss and the Arniki, people also don't lend out because Menachshi Inchi Veloy Mishli. People are afraid of the symbolism of lending something out. Rashish Inchi Menachshi Inchi Shlo Yitlu Zem Mazloi. People are afraid that if you lend out your wallet, you're lending out your mazel. Imagine I want to borrow Moshe Reichman's wallet for a couple of days. It'll be good for my mazel. Or you could say Kalev means Bechiyuri Besumki. The simonim that we're talking about of Kalev doesn't mean clothing. Doesn't mean the type of clothing. It means the color. The color is not a raya at all. So Rashi asks, to be kasha, Hakatani Aisha Nimsa Ben Kalev. It says if it's found amongst his Kalev. And that's a good raya. I ha'amr dechashin l'sheva, but Rashi l'kasha. Kalev the Masnisin, Hainu Begoda. The Kalev of the Mishnah means his clothing, B'derech lahashel malbushim. The Kalev the Gittin, and the Kalev in Gittin where it says you could give it back based on if you found the get amongst his Kalev. Hainu ben klitash mishe besa. You found it amongst the tools that he has in his house, his pots and pans, but they've also in his box, say derech lashilam. So Kalev could mean clothing, where there it's not a good riot, because someone could have lent out his clothing, or Kalev could mean his actual tools and utensils, and those would be a good riot. Zoktamar Viter. Even if you saw someone all full of stab wounds, that's not proof that he's going to die. Are you telling me that a Meguyit could survive and he can't say Edus? Or Ramini, I'll ask you a kasha. Adam Einoy Mitame Achete Se Nafshay, Afila Meguyit. A person will not be Mitama until he's completely dead, even if it's Meguyit. Afila Geises. So you see from here that a Meguyit could not live, because it says that even if he's Meguyit, he's not Tameh. Tamuya le Mitame. Ha Michya lo Chaya. The whole raya of the Bryce is he's not Tameh until he's actually dying. Don't say since for sure he's going to die, he's Tameh now. Rather, he actually died. But you still have a raya from here that the Pasha is for sure the person is going to die. When by like Kasha, Harab Shimon Lazar Harabonam to Machlokes. The Tanya, Me'idin ala Meguyit, you could say Eidos ala Meguyit that he's dead. The Ein Me'idin ala Tzolov, but you cannot say Eidos on someone who's Tzolov. So a Meguyit for sure is going to die, but a Tzolov, someone who's crucified, is not surely going to die. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Af ala Meguyit Ein Me'idin. You know why? It's possible that the wound could be healed by heat. With a burn, it would seal and stop the bleeding, and he'd be able to live. I'm sorry? Corduroy, that's what it's called. Right. With heat. It's corduroy, it's not corduroy. Frank Gemara, can you possibly say that our mission is going like Shimon ben Elazar, who holds it says in the Sefer, there was a story that occurred in Asya. They lowered him down, I guess, off a rope into the Yam. So they were on a boat, they lowered him into the Yam. And I guess he was dragging in the water, and his leg that was connected to the chain got severed from his body, and the only thing they pulled up was his leg. And the Chacham said, if the leg that was severed, that they pulled up, connected to the rope, was above his knee, so that's how much he lost, then she could remarry, we can assume he would not have survived. But if the part of the leg that got severed for the body was below the knee, then Leitina say it's possible that she survived. Zok to Gemara, so you have a raya from here that a Meguyot cannot live. Zok to Gemara, that's different. That's a Meguyot in water. Shiny Maya, the Marzumaka. The water is going to antagonize It makes it worse. That's why we know he died. But a regular Meguyad, maybe that person could survive. Frank Gemara, but Merabba Babachana, I saw with my own eyes who tired the shekel of Sapsira. There was a merchant that took a rein, the guy de la Gamle, and he cut or he wounded badly his camel, and the camel died. And the animal was screaming in pain until it died, but it for sure dies. That wasn't a fully healthy camel to begin with. That's why it died. But a person who's healthy might be able to survive even though he's full of wounds. Rava holds it's not a raya at all, because this case where someone could survive is speaking where he was cut with a very hot knife. If it's a very hot knife, as the knife is stabbing him, it's cauterizing the wound that it's making. So therefore, he could survive. But a normal mugayad maybe wouldn't. Even if someone sees a corpse being eaten by an animal, it's still not a good riot. If the chaya is nibbling on the person's arm, that maybe wouldn't be a riot that he died. If the chaya is nibbling on the guy's heart, of course, from eating, that would be a good riot. What if they shechted a person, two samanim, and the person ran away? Me'idin, you could say, Eidos, definitely this man didn't survive. And is that so? And he couldn't speak at that point, but he made a sign. And he told somebody there, "Kives to get leishti, bimani you a shliach, try to get for my wife. They can give him a get. So you see, he must be alive if he can be man shliach. He's alive right now, but the Seifei Lamos, there's no way that he could survive. Therefore, they wait an hour. They could say Eidos the fact that he died. Well, the get would have had to be delivered before he actually died. So if they write a get and they make a shliach, look, let's say if she's right there and he wrote the get quickly before the guy died, so maybe she wouldn't be mechuyev to do evil. But your clock is ticking. I don't know how much timing you have, but it would have to be done very quickly. So if you're saying that for sure Seifei Lamos, so then El Mayata Yegoy Al Yada. In other words, if someone by mistake shecht somebody, so Rashi says El Mayata since someone's for sure going to die if he shechted Yegoy La Sheichtai. If someone shechted somebody b'shoigeg, he should go into golus. Im nafal saken miyadai alone. Someone drops a knife and it fell on the victim. B'shachted and shechted him. He should go into golus, but it's surely going to cause death. Alama Tanya, why did we learn in the Brisa, Ein Goyla, Vafilu Meis? You don't go into goals if such a thing occurred, even if the person ended up dying, because Shema Machmas Dover Acher Meis. Maybe the cause of death is not the cut. It was probably COVID. Zok Gemara, it's possible that since there was air, wind, that could have antagonized the wound, and of course he would have died anyway. But his death was hastened because of that. So kum techos, it wasn't just the shchita that caused the death; it was also the ruach. But that's enough that you wouldn't go into galus for that. Inami shema iu kirv misase. Maybe the victim himself, by jumping around, caused his death to come faster, and once again, that would pater the person from golus. So, what's the difference between these two pshatim? The shachta bevesa, the shisha, uparchas. If he shachted him inside and there was no wind at all, but he was still moving around, so there's no chashash that it was wind that antagonized the wound. So that's the reason why he doesn't go into golus. In this case, he would. But if the reason is because the victim moved around and that hastened his death, that still applies even though it was inside. or if he was shackled outside with his wind, but he didn't move at all, he was very still, that would be a case where only according to the Shita, the jumping around hastens the death, but otherwise he wouldn't, otherwise we would be sure it happened from the Shita, and he would go into Belis. This is like a very, it's a very sad Gemara, talking about identifying corpses. We should never, ever, ever have to know or see these things. I remember